the Viking Age, a period that spanned from the late 8th century to the mid-11th century. It is often remembered as a time of fierce warriors, daring seafarers, and brutal raids that terrorized Europe. But the story of the Vikings is far more complex than just bloodshed and conquest. It is a saga of rise and fall, of a people who began as farmers and traders in the harsh landscapes of Scandinavia and transformed into one of the most feared and influential forces in medieval Europe. The story begins in the late 700s. In the remote fjords and icy waters of what is now Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, the Vikings, driven by a combination of overpopulation, scarce resources, and a thirst for adventure, began to build sleek, fast, and deadly vessels known as longships. These ships, with their shallow drafts and ability to navigate both open seas and narrow rivers, became the key to the Vikings' success. With the ocean as their highway, the Vikings set out on voyages that would take them across Europe and beyond, raiding, trading, as far apart as the British Isles, the coasts of France, and the distant reaches of Russia. The first recorded Viking raid in 793 on the monastery of Lindisfarne in England sent shockwaves throughout Christendom. The attack was brutal, swift, and unexpected, a pattern that would become the hallmark of Viking warfare. Churches and monasteries, seen as wealthy but poorly defended targets, became frequent victims of Viking raids. The suddenness and ferocity of these attacks, combined with the Vikings' pagan beliefs, created an aura of terror that spread throughout Europe. But the Vikings were not just raiders. They were also skilled traders and explorers. They established trade routes that stretched from the Middle East to the Arctic, dealing in goods such as furs, slaves, amber, and silver. Viking traders navigated the rivers of Eastern Europe, founding cities like Novgorod and Kyiv, and even reached the Byzantine Empire, where they served as mercenaries in the Varangian Guard. The Vikings' expansion was not limited to Europe. In the 9th and 10th centuries, they established settlements in Iceland, Greenland, and even North America, centuries before Columbus set foot in the New World. The discovery of the Vinland settlement in Newfoundland, Canada, is a testament to the Vikings' extraordinary seafaring abilities and their relentless drive to explore new territories. Meanwhile, back in Europe, the Vikings were carving out kingdoms of their own. In England, Viking leaders such as Guthrum and Ivar the Boneless established the Danelaw, a region of England under Norse control. In France, Viking chieftain Rollo was granted land by the Frankish king, creating the Duchy of Normandy, which would later play a pivotal role in European history. In Ireland and Scotland, the Vikings founded cities like Dublin and wielded significant influence over the local population. But the Vikings were not invincible. As their power grew, so too did the resistance of their enemies. In England, King Alfred the Great managed to halt the Viking advance, eventually forcing the Norsemen to settle and adopt Christianity. In the Frankish Empire, Charlemagne's descendants fortified their cities and built armies capable of repelling Viking attacks. The spread of Christianity throughout Scandinavia also played a crucial role in the decline of Viking power. As the Norse gods were replaced by the Christian god, the old warrior ethos began to fade. Viking kings, once raiders themselves, began to consolidate their power, establishing centralized states and making treaties with their former enemies. The Viking Age was drawing to a close. The final blow came in 1066 at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. Harald Hardrada, the last great Viking king, was defeated by the English king Harold Godwinson, marking the end of the Viking Age. The Vikings, once the scourge of Europe, had become part of the very societies they had once terrorized. Their legacy, however, lived on. The Vikings left an indelible mark on the history of Europe. Their influence can be seen in the languages, cultures, and even the genetic makeup of the people from the British Isles to Russia. The tales of Viking sagas and mythology continue to captivate the imagination, while their ships, with their iconic dragon-headed prows, remain symbols of adventure and exploration. Yet, the story of the Vikings is also a cautionary tale of the rise and fall of power. From humble beginnings as farmers and fishermen, the Vikings built an empire that spanned continents. But as they expanded, they also overreached, and their reliance on raiding as a way of life ultimately led to their downfall. The very forces that had propelled them to greatness, innovation, adaptability, a warrior spirit, could not sustain them in a world that was rapidly changing. By the end of the 11th century, the Viking Age was over, but its legacy would endure for centuries to come. The Vikings had not only shaped the history of Europe, but it also helped to create the modern world. In the end, the rise and fall of Norse power is a story of transformation. It is the story of a people who began as outcasts on the fringes of the known world and became a dominant force in the heart of Europe. It is the story of how their society, driven by the need for survival and the desire for wealth and glory, reshaped itself and the world around them. And it is the story of how, in the face of overwhelming odds, they adapted, changed, and ultimately faded into history, leaving behind a legacy that continues to fascinate and inspire.